Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Ukraine's wartime government reshuffle has sparked one of the most significant political controversies since Russia's full-scale invasion. The dismissal of Defense Minister Mykhailo Fedorov has triggered protests, exposed tensions over military reform, and raised fresh questions about President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership at a pivotal moment in the war. Now, joining us today on TVP World to discuss what these changes mean for Ukraine's war effort is McNamee, co-founder of Ukraine Business News Network. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So over the past few days, people have been questioning the change in the reshuffle of the government. Names were being floated around, and now the dust seems to have settled. We've finally finalized some of the decisions, one of which is the replacement of Defense Minister Fedorov. Now, he's been a chief of defense for 6 months, and it does seem like the frontline situation, the strikes in Russia, is going relatively well. Do you know why or what's the reason behind the replacement of the defense minister?
Yeah, this is the golden question. This is a bit of a mystery, really. This is, of course, trying to read behind the scenes of what's happening in Ukrainian politics, which is always a difficult thing to truly understand. On the surface of it, what it appears, at least, is that and what has been reported is that Zelensky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, gave President Zelensky an ultimatum, essentially, and said that the conflict has gone too far between himself and Fedorov, and so effectively forced Zelensky's hand. And that has been what has essentially been reported. That is what Fedorov has also claimed as well, and Zelensky said he couldn't work with Fedorov anymore. That was problematic for Zelensky because Zelensky does ultimately have more power and has more really influence even across the entire system as the commander-in-chief of the forces. And Fedorov, while influential, of course, and as the Minister of Defense has considerable influence, Zelensky would, in this case, have to sort of side with the stronger power, in this case, as it is with Zelensky. There's probably a lot more going on than meets the eye related to all this, but at least on the surface, that appears what is happening. And again, this is taking place in the context of a more general government reshuffle. And that was happening for a number of reasons. There's of course, war fatigue, mobilization fatigue. We need, of course, to improve energy infrastructure in advance of this coming winter. So that partially explains the replacement of the prime minister with Sergei Koretsky, who was the head of the nation's largest energy company. So there's a lot of other moving parts and things going on here. But at first, what meets the eye, it looks like Zelensky more or less forced Zelensky's hand. And then trying to read beyond that and understand things is a bit more difficult, but there's numerous theories out there, of course, as to what is actually going on.
All right, of course, a lot still under wraps, but you also touch upon the larger government reshuffle as well and mentioned war fatigue, mobilization fatigue. My question is whether or not this government reshuffle, changing the prime minister, some government official, can actually deal with the war fatigue, because we still see the war going on, we still see possible mobilization taking place.
Right, and my answer would be, with the way this reshuffle has been conducted the last couple of days, possibly not, with how it's being done. And I'm saying that because Fedorov was extremely popular. And we can see, if you look at the war, I mean, really going back to February 2022, this is truly, if not the best position that Ukraine has been in, then this is maybe the best since roughly the end of 2022. And that is attributable, of course, to Fedorov's work. And so Fedorov has become an extremely popular politician in Ukraine. And so that's why it's very questionable. Is this really the right move when a guy who is really admired and respected domestically, admired and respected deeply by the soldiers, which is, you cannot really say the same about Zelensky, and also by Western partners. He's also seen, he's 35 years old, he is an innovator, he's a reformer, he already had numerous proven successful reforms in the digital environment prior to taking on his position as Minister of Defense. As Minister of Defense, unequivocally, he has been seen just in his 6 months as the most successful Minister of Defense in Ukraine's history. So removing him is obviously highly questionable, specifically for the war effort. The war is going in a far better way, and it's very tangible. We can see this and feel it. And then you remove the person who's largely responsible for that. Of course, it's going to be deeply unpopular, which again gets into the moves. What was Zelensky doing here? Because you'd think he had to have known that, particularly after the unpopularity of his decisions last year and the Mindich scandal and the corruption related to his chief of staff, Andrei Yermak, that people would come out and protest again, which they inevitably did. You wonder what Zelensky was truly thinking sort of behind the scenes and what his political play is, because if you were doing a cabinet reshuffle, in part in response to the war fatigue and the mobilization fatigue, was this actually the right move to take?
All right, like I mentioned, Fedorov has been a very popular figure, and we actually even see protests on the street, which is relatively rare for someone in the position of Ministry of Defense. That does says a lot about how popular this guy has been in the Defense Ministry. You also mentioned him being a figure of reform and quite successful, arguably one of the most successful military personnel there. It's hard to imagine that people don't see, or Zelensky don't see, this is not good for its optics, especially with a little bit of lack of transparency. Like you mentioned, we don't really know what's under wraps. Are there any kind of speculation, some of the theories that you most lean on, and how does that look from like partners and allies of Ukraine?
Right. Yeah, and I will speculate a bit here, so take this a bit with a grain of salt. But from my contacts in the government and in the militech industry, within the military itself, journalists, military analysts, this is very early days, right? It's only the last 24 hours or so. But what it seems to me is that again, Zelensky had to make a choice, and he was forced, likely because of the system and Syrskyi's power, to side with Syrsky over Fedorov. However, Zelensky could not, I don't believe, could have been really this out of touch with the mood on the street and politically, socially out of touch in this way. So I do believe Zelensky likely would have foreseen protests coming out, and in which case that would shine the light more on Syrsky. He couldn't really, within the system, fire Syrsky, so he could get people out on the street, though, against Syrsky. And I'm saying this because in the last 24 hours, we've seen the tone and mood shift a bit away from blaming Zelensky for this to blaming Syrsky. And we're seeing a lot of media coming out against Syrsky. And in addition, I would note, again, a part maybe of Zelensky's ploy here, United 24 is really one of the major mouthpieces for Zelensky's government. Has been one of the most supportive of Zelensky's government since he came into office. United 24 was one of the first media outlets to come out and say, we are not working today, and come support the protests to support Fedorov, which kind of gives an inkling as to Zelensky's side here. So I think maybe something's going on here. And Fedorov, by the way, I'd mention in his speech upon leaving office, he said that, and I quote, Zelensky hears the voice of the Ukrainian people and knows what to do. So these are kind of telling signs that maybe Zelensky is sort of playing the game against Syrsky, who, by the way, is not particularly popular with the troops or in the domestic population, but has a strong hold on the system. So I think maybe Zelensky is kind of playing a bit of a political game here, but it's a very dangerous one, because initially, at least, Zelensky was being blamed for this. But it looks like that blame is slowly shifting to Syrsky. And so we'll see here in the coming days where all the blame lands.
Right. Regardless of what's Zelensky's true intention, like you mentioned, this is a very dangerous game to be playing right now, especially when it comes to dealing with this internal politics with moves such as this that would have an international optics as well. How are Ukraine's Western partners likely to interpret these developments? Will they see this as just some sort of internal conflict? Is it going to be some sort of cause for concern?
It's a cause for concern, and I don't think that they will simply limit this to an internal conflict and keep their hands off. I feel certain behind the scenes, and likely in coming public statements, that we're going to see a lot more pressure from European leaders. You have to think, I mean, European leaders do understand that this war is in part existential for them as well, but also they have footed the bill for this war for over 4 years, so they feel like they have some skin in the game, you can say, where they should have some influence. And again, Fedorov, his track record speaks for itself. Syrskyi, likewise, is not particularly respected or liked outside of Ukraine either. So we know, and we've already seen, journalists have already reported that in their contacts with European leaders, European defense ministers, it's numerous other partners, that they are very angry about this decision. So assuredly, they're behind the scenes, they're putting pressure on Zelensky to sort of sort this one out properly and keep Fedorov. And Zelensky even said Fedorov will be a part of the government going forward. So I think EU leaders will have a voice in this, just like they had a voice last year. They were highly impactful in the issue regarding Andriy Yermak and the corruption scandal at that time. So I think they will be pushing things in the direction of Fedorov.
And in a more practical sense, do you think that this government reshuffle and a changing of defense minister is going to bring any disruption or immediate impact to the current frontline situation, the war effort? Is it going to leave some window of vulnerability when during the shifting of the guards?
It's a good question, and as long as this is a short-term issue, the answer is no. If this drags on for weeks and weeks and into months, then potentially. And I would highlight the central, what I would finish here with, the central point here is that this is also a battle between Syrskyi and Fedorov of the old traditional style of the Ukrainian military versus new, innovative, reformist, and anti-corruption style of Fedorov coming in. So this is an internal battle. But the big point here is if you want to win this war, drag Russia into the war that it doesn't know how to fight. Russia knows how to fight the war of high mobilization and high artillery, and that's the war that Syrskyi wants to fight. Russia does not know how to fight, as we've seen the last 6 months. The war that Fedorov is proposing, this is the war that is going on, that has been successful for Ukraine, and the war of the future for this century. And Russia doesn't know how to fight that war. So this also gives a reason why the EU leaders are likely going to be pushing more for Fedorov. He's fighting the war that Ukraine can win.
All right, last but not least, just looking ahead, what should we be watching to see whether or not, or judge whether this reshuffle strengthens Ukraine's war effort or is becoming some structural concerns?
I think watching for what actually happens to Fedorov, if he is potentially even reinstated based upon the domestic and international pressure, that's one thing. Number two, what happens to Syrskyi? There are rumors already, and it's only 24 hours, there are rumors already of him being potentially fired, forced to resign, or in some way removed from the scene, which is very new. That has not been a realistic scenario for the past, say, 2 years now. So I would say watch for that, but then also watch, he tried to put in a replacement for Minister of Defense for Fedorov, and that didn't happen. So this is a bit problematic because now the Rada is on vacation for a month, and so there will just be an acting defense minister, but we can expect that the current policy and strategies will continue for the foreseeable future, and it's highly unlikely that Zelensky would do anything to change the current strategy, which has been so effective and has been clearly working for the last 6 months.
All right, so we'll have to see how this develops. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.